Retro now.
Hey, you scruffy nerf herders. This is Catherine Tabor, Mission Veo from Knights of the Old Republic, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Aren't you lucky?
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it is Friday, which means we're going to be concentrating on the news portion of the news, reviews, and discussion description of the show. But before we get into the latest, Jay will remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Of course, Dennis, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and sometimes X at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we've got a lot of stories that are related to each other, and we'll get into those in just a moment. But up first, in our movie news, it comes word that The Mandalorian and Grogu have completed principal photography. So they wrapped in October. And the movie is on targets for its May 22nd, 2026 release date. The report is that filming went smoothly with no issues. And, well, we'll get into this last bit here in just a second. But that is so refreshing to hear.
Yes.
What was the last movie that came out for Star Wars that didn't have some sort of production issue, whether it was the writing, the director, the production of the whole thing? I mean, I realize there is still, 17 months before we're supposed to see this movie, but wow, they got through a lot of it without any issues.
Right. I know. I kept almost holding my breath. I think we both were just waiting for the shoe to drop, that something was going to happen, because that's what's been happening, as we've gotten these hopes up, and then the next thing you know, like you said, something falls through the floor, which, I'm sure that there will be some sort of reshoots, or perhaps, some sort of editing or whatever, but at least now this really does kind of almost make you go, all right, we've got it. We've got something we know we're going to look forward to. And like you said, that's a great word for it. It's very refreshing indeed.
I have no doubt that there'll be some sort of pickup shoot for this, because every movie does that. As they get into the editing process, they realize this does not flow into this the way we thought it does. So mark that down. We need to film something there, and this doesn't film. There'll be things that they need to do. Every movie does that these days. That's not going to be a surprise. But I don't think we're looking anything like reshooting 40 to 50% of the movie like Rogue One,
right?
Or any of those type of things. So, and I think the advantages that this movie had going for it was that it was written and directed by Jon Favreau, with a script that Lucasfilm had already seen, because it sounds like it's coming out of what was planned for season 4 of The Mandalorian. And you already had Dave Filoni and a whole creative crew behind this project. So they need the win, and I'm happy that so far there hasn't been any big issues with this, and at least for the moment, it is on target for its release date.
Yes. And I appreciated what the article on Fiat the Track said as well, that just the fact that now, things can really start moving forward. Everything from the volume is done, and Ludwig Göransson can work on his score, but it is kind of weird to think about just Pedro Pascal as the voice of the Mandalorian, and I know that he's been that, and it has kind of, gone in that direction, but it's still, just from seeing him back, in Chicago in 2019, and how incredibly excited he was to be in the suit. And now he's, I don't want to say just a voice, and I don't want to, like put it that way, but that it's been evolved to that point, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I don't think you're disparaging anything. You're just reciting the reality of the situation here, where, what is Braden Wayne and Lateef Crowder are the two that are typically in that suit. I think there's a third person that also is a stand-in as well.
Mhm.
But so much what the Mandalorian does is action scenes, and the people best equipped for those are those two stunt actors. And so
Exactly.
it really is Team Din Djarin out there. It's kind of funny. It's like, you know, you hear about Jabba the Hutt requiring like 7 people to operate. You wouldn't think of the
Mhm.
Mandalorian as requiring
Right.
7
Well,
people to pull off, but
it's so crazy in a way to think about the fact that it's coming full circle to Darth Vader. If you
Mhm.
think about it, because you had David Prowse and then you had, James Earl Jones doing the voice. And so you did have different people in the suit versus doing the voice. And
And I think
so it's
someone else was there for the sword saber battles as well,
right. Yeah.
and especially in The Empire Strikes Back. So that's a
Yep.
good point. I hadn't thought about that connection, but you're so right.
So, but yeah, I'm so excited that this is actually happening. It's almost like pinch me
Mhm.
now, make sure it's gonna keep happening. And I did see too on Instagram that Star Wars Insider is celebrating a half decade of The Mandalorian in issue 228. So we are just as old as The Mandalorian, if you think about it. We just celebrated a half a decade of the podcast.
Yeah, that is true. I hadn't thought of that, but you're so right. Because it was one of the first things we covered on this
Right.
show. You know, we released the episode. We were just celebrating 800 episodes and talking about things that we, we covered in the last 100 and what we were expecting for the next 800. It's all getting wrecked by the rest of the news here. So,
Yeah.
or potentially getting wrecked. I don't want to go too far, but we'll get to that in just a second. But yeah, we talked about, we had our news episodes. We did, like, we released with World Between Worlds. We were covering season 2 of Resistance, and then the two big things we were looking forward to were The Mandalorian
Mhm.
and The Rise of Skywalker
Mhm.
at the time. So yeah, that's weird to think that
Yeah.
they've been through 3 seasons of that, the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and countless other, not countless, but a couple other live action shows as well. So,
Right, right.
all
Well,
right.
one fun thing, real quick, I
Uh-huh.
have to
Okay,
say is that, as we did again, just did our 800th episode, is that this podcast has really become a fun time capsule. You
that's
know what
true.
I mean? In a lot
Yeah,
of ways that we could go back and listen to different things and just really revisit what the state of Star Wars was at the time.
yeah. And if you do something like listen to every 20 or 30 episodes, or something, it just keeps, you can kind of hear how our format evolved over time too.
Right.
So,
Yep.
yeah. Okay. Well, here is where things go a little crazy.
Hmm.
And stop me if you've heard this before, but a Star Wars movie has lost its writer.
No, say it ain't so.
And in this case, this movie has lost its writer for the second time. And more specifically, Stephen Knight has exited the Rey New Jedi Order project as its writer. So, to refresh, this is news that came out of Variety. He signed on to write this movie in March of 2023, or somewhere thereabouts. And he was replacing Damon Lindelof and Justin Britt Gibson at the time, who have kind of bemoaned their experience trying to write a Star Wars movie since then. And so we are now hearing that Lucasfilm is actively talking with potential writers, and Charmin Obaid-Chinoy is still attached to direct, and Daisy Ridley is still attached to star in the movie. I mean, of course, right? I mean, things
Mhm.
were going a little too well. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just I can't even get upset about this because it's just kind of what we expect to happen at this point, right?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I mean, it's the whole Pavlov's dog thing, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
But I'm just wondering, was there ever a reason as to why Stephen Knight decided to leave? Or
Not that
we
I've
just don't
heard.
have that? Yeah.
Not that I've heard. Okay, so let's try and be positive about this for a second. He's left the project, and we'll get into another story here that talks about this in just a second. But it's not. Of course, it's not the first time that this has happened, and some of the Star Wars movies that have lost writers have still been made. Think about The Force Awakens. Mike Arndt, I think that's his name, Mike Arndt, he was the original writer on this, and he worked on it for a while. George Lucas had done a little bit of stuff for this movie, and then eventually J.J. Abrams took over the writing with Lawrence Kasdan. Go check out the writing credits for that. Mike Arndt still's got a credit on it. They still use part of his script.
Hmm.
So it doesn't mean that there's nothing at this point. It doesn't mean that whatever writer comes in is going to completely rewrite the script. It may be a pass and a polish to get this script where Lucasfilm wants it, and it was either something that Stephen Knight didn't want to do or was not capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that they are very particular about their scripts at Lucasfilm. So
Definitely.
that's one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it's just kind of like, come on. Can these things not go smoothly? I mean, we just talked about one where it did, but I think we know why, because everything was already done in advance to make this a Disney Plus show before they decided to convert it to a movie.
And it's Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. So,
right.
Boom.
Guys who've done a whole bunch of Star Wars content.
Yep. So that's one of the drawbacks, I think, as much as it's a huge sandbox that so many people can play in with Star Wars, is that, sometimes things get a little diluted when you start adding so many people into these creative projects, which I understand it's not, obviously it's not George Lucas anymore writing all of these. But, you look at it from the standpoint that it's almost like having a Baskin Robbins. There's just so many people out there that could potentially fit the bill, and it's hard to really get one that fits, and I don't know if it's because, with Charmaine Obaid-Chinoy having such a very specific vision maybe for this movie, but at this point, I don't even know of any writers off the top of my head that I could even suggest that I would want to write this. And because one, I'm not as super familiar with writers as I am directors, but I almost wonder, could Daisy Ridley herself even potentially lend a hand in writing this? I mean, she's obviously Rey, and she's invested so much into the character that she knows her motivations and, her hopes and desires and dreams and things like that. So, I mean, I wouldn't even be opposed to having her as a consultant, at least.
Yeah, I could see her consulting on the character. As far as the script, I don't know what, if any, experience she has doing something like that. But since you brought her up, she was on the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, and she was asked about this movie. And this was happening at the same time we were finding out that Stephen Knight was exiting the project. And she was kind of coy about it, but she said she may have already seen something with respect to a script. And she phrased it as, we are waiting on imminent news. And she pressed a little bit further on it. She said, there might be a date when they are in the next state. Like, this news might be a date when they're going to be in the next stages. So it was vague enough, but a lot of people are interpreting this that maybe things aren't so far off after all. But, she went on in this interview to go ahead and express her excitement for the project on another podcast, The Playlist, as well. And, she basically said, if I didn't think this was a good idea or a cool concept, I would have told them to come back to me in 5 years. And so there is that. Okay. You can take this one of a couple ways. One, she's seen some sort of draft of the script that she liked, and so it just needs to be polished. It needs to be turned into a Lucasfilm Star Wars movie. Two, if she gets to do this movie, this will probably be the movie that has the biggest box office since she did The Rise of Skywalker of anything that she's done. So she's got a lot in writing on this movie. I mean, she's been successful since then. She's been in a number of roles, but she's not been able to do anything that's this big since then. So there's that. And then, she's going to stick up for a project that, she is a talent associated with it. So,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I'm encouraged by this, but I'm also very guarded by this news.
Yeah. Daisy, she usually tends to keep things pretty close, to her. And she, even though she's after the fact has said, how difficult it was for her to do those kinds of things, but obviously with those NDRs, they have to, but she's always been very, very careful. So for her to say this, that something is imminent, that does make me wonder, if we're really going to get something very soon that's going to be announced.
Yeah. Cause I've seen a couple places where she said that she believes they could start filming sometime next year.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but you got to have a finished script for that. And, or maybe you don't. I mean, they went in and did Rogue One, and then after they had shot a movie. They had Tony Gilroy come in and basically redo the last 40% or so of it.
And that still blows my mind. You know
Yeah.
that? I mean, and I remember when we got that news originally, and we are like, "Wait, what?" And that was kind of the first time I'd ever heard of anything happening like that, and now it just seems commonplace,
Hmm.
you know?
Okay. So there's still yet another twist to all of this. And in an interview with Empire, James Mangold confirmed that Dawn of the Jedi is his next film and that it could begin shooting next year in 2025.
Wow. Yeah, it's like at this point,
So,
it's almost like playing Clue, Colonel Mustard in the library. What
well, I
like, who's
mean,
doing what?
yeah, okay. I'm not sure how much I buy this, to be honest with you. So I know he's co-writing this movie with Bo Milliman. And so maybe Bo's been working on it because I know James been working on a lot of movies recently. It's not like he's been sitting around just
Mhm.
working on a script. So maybe they've got something and they just need to get Lucasfilm approval and then they can ramp up and get into production. And this movie may jump the queue so that it could be the December 2026 release that's currently planned for Star Wars. But I don't know. I appreciate his enthusiasm, but I'm having a hard time believing this one. But what do you think?
Well, I mean, James Mangold has an amazing track record with so
Mhm.
many movies that we know that, he's one that I feel that he has to have that confidence to be able
Mhm.
to say these kinds of things. And maybe it is kind of a red herring just to say, "Oh yeah, look over here, look at me. I'm going to be doing this." But then again, I mean, he's had the work to back it up, before. So I'm hoping that he's got something that he can really jump forward with. But again, we're always playing, like I always say, whack-a-mole with all these Star Wars movies, and it's hard to keep them pinned down.
Sure. I guess here's the other thing about it is that there's been no news on casting for this movie. And
Mhm,
if they're really going to go into production, I mean, sure, they could go the route where Daisy Ridley, everyone knows who she is now because she was in
mhm,
Star Wars, but pretty much an unknown at the time she got cast for this. John Boyega had been in a few movies that had some attention, but he was not widely known at the time. And Star Wars doesn't typically go with the biggest name actors when they're starting a movie or something like that. So it's very possible that we get people that we don't that familiar with in here. But my point is that you would think that they'd have to start nailing down the casting for a potential filming date next year if this is really going to happen. And there's been, not Deadspin, not Variety, not the Hollywood Reporter. No one's been reporting on any casting for this movie,
mhm,
which I kind of feel like we would have started to hear by now because here it is, the end of October. We got 1 month left in this year for a movie that's potentially filming next year. I don't know how long it takes to cast a movie, but the point is just that if you're going to get any significant actor for it, I feel like you got to have someone who's got some availability in their schedule. And I would think those 2025 schedules are pretty full by now.
mhm. Yeah, because people really do, I mean, get on the docket very quickly when it comes
Mhm.
to, ahead. I shouldn't say quickly, but way far out into the future so that they can keep these things running. But yeah, it's really hard to say. I kind of like to be positive and say, well, maybe we'll get a really big announcement at Celebration, and that
Sure.
it'll just all of a sudden just be breaking news and that the whole cast will be announced and then we'll all be in awe.
And that's very possible. I mean, because we typically get some sort of big news like that.
Mhm,
And it would be great if they do bring Daisy Ridley out on stage and then they bring out all of her co-stars for this. And, we get to
mhm,
meet them and they announce that this movie is going to begin filming in June of 2025 or something like that. Insert date there. It could be anytime during the year.
mhm.
But again, for a movie supposed to be coming out in December 2026, that's cutting it because here we
It
are
is.
just finishing principal photography on the Mandalorian and Grogu in 2024, and that's not coming out until May 2026.
Mhm.
They have
Yeah.
a full year and a half to do that. You aren't unless that movie pick starts filming in February and they're done by June, they're not going to have a year and a half to finish with the production on that.
Right.
So that's part of my skepticism on this. Now, with that having been said, we can make some predictions. It's just funny because I was just alluding to how you and I made all these predictions about the movies that are coming out for the next 5 years. And I feel like this all just got flushed based off of this news that came out right after we recorded that episode. It was before
truly did.
episode. It was before we released the episode, but it came out right beforehand. So there's some thought that perhaps the Mandalorian and Grogu gets moved from that May slot to December. And the advantage of doing that is they wouldn't be putting it up against the imminent release of an Avengers movie.
And which we have talked about, right?
Yeah. So that's a possibility. Two, I mean, perhaps the James Mangold movie is much farther along and they've successfully kept it under wraps. And okay, great. That one gets done. And then the third possibility, and we kind of talked about this on episode 800, is that the new Jedi Order movie gets pushed back to 2027. Where do you lean on this?
Well, honestly, I hate to say it, but I think that the Mandalorian Grogu movie, it's almost a smart move to move it to December to give things a little bit more time to breathe and to have a little bit more focus. And as much as I used to hate to admit it, that I always liked the May releases because of course all the original trilogies came out in May and the prequel trilogies came out in May. But we've talked about this before. The Christmas holiday really is kind of synonymous with Star Wars releases. So I can totally see it being moved to that. But, and James Mangold did say that shooting could begin in 2025. I mean, that could also mean like maybe even in December of 2025 before it even starts to be, filmed.
Exactly.
But I do think that as much as I'd hate to say it, I do think that Mando and Grogu will get moved at the very least of all of that.
I think that's possible. I think that's very possible, and stands a very good chance that that's going to happen. I would be surprised, I think, at this point to see the new Jedi Order come out in 2026. I think it's more likely for 2027.
Right.
And I think the other possibility is that that instead of all these movies they announced, whether it is the Dave Filoni Mandoverse movie, whether we're talking about James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi or the new Jedi Order movie, we could potentially get a trilogy of Mandalorian movies over the next several years. Because
I could see that.
Yeah, I mean,
Totally.
there has been some rumors that because Giancarlo Esposito was kind of talking about the potential for the Mandalorian and Grogu to spin off into a trilogy of movies of some sort. And why not? I mean, you've got the talent in-house. Everyone wants to do these movies. Favreau and Filoni seem to have a great working relationship with Kathleen Kennedy and the other chief officer. I mean, well, technically Dave Filoni is one of them, chief creative officer. But you know what I mean? They're at Lucasfilm. So they would seem to be able to get those movies written and set up for production much faster to everyone's liking. They just had that built-in advantage.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that would be a smart move to move it completely to the big screen and do a trilogy as opposed to a standalone single shot movie because there's so much saturation on Disney Plus, as we know, coming up with all these different projects. And not that that's a bad thing because, we always say we love that our Star Wars cup runneth over.
Sure.
But yeah, why not put them on the big screen? Because then it drives more of that viewership back into the theaters as well.
Yeah, I don't want Disney Plus to completely become devoid of new Star Wars content because that was the other thing we were just talking about is like what comes after this year. We don't know. After 2025, we know we got Skeleton Crew coming up here in December. We know I've got season 2 of Andor and eventually season 2 of Ahsoka, but we don't know when that is, and we don't really have any plans going ahead. Any number of years into the future with content that we're expecting on Disney Plus. And honestly, maybe the best route is to do more animation for Star Wars. Whatever the successor series to the Bad Batch is, and make them longer than 12, 15 episodes. Give us 20, 23 episode seasons of that, and let that be our Star Wars content that ties between movies. Just an idea. I don't know how feasible that is, but I don't want to lose Star Wars content, but if it means what we get is of a better quality, then I'm all for it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And, it almost makes me wonder too if this has anything to do with the story that we had covered a little bit ago about the evolution of streaming in
Hmm.
general and the way that we're going to be consuming our streaming products. And if that is maybe this is the precursor to that. You know what I mean?
Could be, could be. Yeah, I don't know. I think um, Patty Jenkins, now that she's not doing Wonder Woman or the Cleopatra movie, she says she's working on her Rogue Squadron movie again.
Hmm.
So we'll see what happens with that. Sean Levy has got to finish up, I guess, with whatever's going on in Stranger Things, and I guess he's supposed to be diving into whatever Star Wars project he's working on. Taika Waititi seems to be stuck on whatever script. That's the last update we got.
Yeah, the third
Yeah.
act is what he needed, I think.
Hmm. I think the Lando movie's chances of getting made have plummeted. Now that Donald Glover seems to be taking a break from just about everything
Hmm.
on that, and yeah, so I just don't. I don't want to be pessimistic, but that just seems to be where we are on things, and I'm hoping they can get. I know we're getting Mandalorian and Grogu. Whether that comes out in May or December of 2026, it would be cool to have a Star Wars movie to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Star Wars in
Oh, yeah.
2027. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. And
mhm.
as we're sitting here thinking too, and my brain's kind of going all over the place with animation, and I know we just talked about this on episode 800 with our predictions. Not really a prediction, but maybe a wish list thing. And I know you would love this. Would be an animated series on the adventures of Dr. Afra. Wouldn't that be
Oh yeah,
amazing?
oh yeah, I'd sign up in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
Or and it doesn't even have
comic
to
story.
focus on her; just make her a regular character. It could be fun if you did some sort of um, Clone Wars style that took place in the years between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, even, that kind of focuses on these characters. I mean, yeah, a lot of it's saturated already, but plenty of stories left that you could tell in that time.
For
So,
sure. Oh yeah, absolutely.
all right. All right. Well, the only other thing we got going on in the news this week is that as of the day this is released, music by John Williams is available on Disney Plus. So we haven't had a chance to see it because we're recording this in advance, but we
So
will be
excited.
sharing our thoughts on that sometime in the very near future. So if you're looking for something Star Wars related to do this weekend, go check that out.
Hmm.
Okay, well then that'll do it for this week's look at Star Wars news. Kind of a mixed bag emotionally when you hear about a troubled Star Wars project, but it was fun to talk about. And we hope you all enjoyed it. And if you did, then please consider subscribing, liking, following, rating, and reviewing Podcast Stardust on your favorite podcatcher. And then head over to retrozap.com, which you can find, well, again, on any browser you're using, but it has the entire catalog of Podcast Stardust from episodes 1 to 801. And we got a lot of content over there. Bunch of other great shows over there on the network, including Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Case Files, Animaniacast, Brews and Blasters, Dork Lair, Doomcast, Enjoy Stuff, Love, Death, and Robots Plus, Superhero Suite, and Warp Trails. And so with that in mind, Jay, we want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online.
You got it, Dennis. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Podcast Stardust. And we do have tons of Pinterest boards that you can check out over on that app. And another app you can check out is YouTube and YouTube Music. So we're on both of those platforms. So we would love it if you would subscribe, and share those out. And those also support ratings, reviews, and interactions too. So it's a great place to go. And another place to interact with us is on Discord. So if you'd like to do that, the link to that is in our show notes. Also, in our show notes is the link to our T Public store where you can check out all kinds of Podcast Stardust swag. So, if you are in need of a closet refresh or just something fun, and of course, the holidays are coming up. So, if you need a gift for yourself or for someone else, head over to the link in our show notes and pick from one of those 7 different show logo designs that we have available.
All right. You want to remind everybody what you got going on with cosplay?
Sure. So right now, kind of quiet, and I'm wrapping up some things that I had going on in October. And so I will be amping things up again here in November and December. But you can always check out everything that I'm up to over on j.snips cosplay on Instagram, where you can find me as Ahsoka, the fourth sister, 2 different versions of Hera, my original concept Mandalorian, and much, much more.
All right. Coming up on the show, on Monday, we are getting back into the Clone Wars with a look at episode 13 from season 1. And then on Wednesday, we are getting back into some comic discussion with a discussion about issues 7 and 8 from Kevin Scott's The High Republic, which is published by Marvel, and that's the Phase 3, issues 7 and 8. So with that, thanks for listening to episode 802 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be with you.